Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Benway. And Dr. Benway is obsessed with Mexican elections. So what the hell are we going to be talking about Mexican elections? Tell me.
Well, way to set me up to be the wet blanket to your excitement. So I basically, a couple thoughts came into my mind.
Yes, communism forever. We know. Tell us how the savior López-Obrador is going to save us all from the clutches of neoliberalism. Yay!
Yes. So for those of you who might have been paying attention to the news, a light issue came up this week, and it was the Mexican election. So Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the first, I think, left-wing / socialist president of Mexico since the end of the one-party system from, let's say, 20 years ago. Before, let's say, his one election. Everybody, or not everybody, but certainly a lot of people on our side are naturally freaking out a little bit. And so there's certainly an interest in trying to digging into who the hell this guy is and what the hell this election means for Mexico. But I think more important, I'm kind of interested because of where you come from, the fact that, hey, there is actually a lot of socialist tendencies, or shall we say socialist victories happening on and off throughout Latin America. So I just wanted to get your take on that. I think obviously you've talked about the shall we say Pinochet response to Salvador Allende. Yeah. But certainly, there's a longer history to it than that. In fact, I think Chile just abandoned their last socialist leader, a year ago, and now they're back to some sort of right wing.
Yeah, a neoliberal kind of guy. Piñera.
Yeah, and in my mind, this is like one of those conversations that's like, okay, everybody's probably freaking out from a lack of full knowledge, and I think if you're going to freak out, at least know what you're talking about. Let's have a discussion about what's really going on in this kind of neck of the woods.
Well, I don't know that much about López-Obrador, okay? And by the way, his last name is López. López-Obrador is his matronymic. In Latin America, in Spanish culture, you use both last names, your paternal last name and your maternal last name, to distinguish yourself from usually your parent, because a lot of times people have the same name as their children. So, for instance, like just to give a hypothetical example, Juan López, which is like John Smith, right? Juan López Valdez, right? That would be like the name of one person to distinguish him from Juan López Soto, which would be another, like potentially his child, for instance. It's a way to distinguish. So López is a very common last name in Mexico and in Latin America in general, and in Spanish culture. And so López Obrador is the way to distinguish it. Just like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Garcia is also very common. So Gabriel Garcia, it might be a little bit confusing, but Gabriel Garcia Marquez, that makes it clear who we're talking about. So anyway, Obrador, he's a socialist, but I haven't been following the Mexican thing that much, to tell you the truth. I know it's a basket case. You have.
Yeah, I looked into it afterwards because naturally this weekend, everybody that I was paying attention to, well, not everybody, but certainly a number of people were saying, "Dear God, the Mexicans have elected a socialist. You see what's happening. They're going to send all of their people over to the border, reclaim the land, and burn every last white person," which could still happen. But my natural inclination is, okay, I don't know shit from Shinola about this guy. Let me look into this guy. Clearly, he's got to have a history. Indeed, he has. And he's honestly, I'll summarize everything I've kind of read about him. He's basically milquetoast socialist, like Bernie Sanders is milquetoast socialist. Probably even more milquetoast than even Bernie was. And so, like, this guy was, mayor of Mexico City for a while. Basic policies he's promoting are things along like, typical social programs you want, certain degree of tax programs.
Pesky poor people, shit like that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of perps and like handouts and whatnot. I mean, like shit that you could even envision a Democrat doing today. I think the biggest issues with him that I think people are kind of going to freak out a little bit about are largely his attitude towards immigration and the rights of migrants. Mm-hmm. And another extent is the degree to which he's going to fight the drug war differently. So on the migrants, he's this big on like, oh, the migrants have, inherent rights to freedoms to live wherever the fuck they want. And he's not just saying necessarily about, oh, Mexicans going to America have the right to do whatever and that shit. That's certainly part of it. But he's also saying Mexico should be a home to, I mean, I'm going to phrase it incorrectly, home to like the refugee, effectively. And I think what he's talking about is how we all have been commenting on Mexico's southern border. Mexico's like, no, don't let these shitheads come into us. Fuck you, America. We'll send our people to you, but we're going to protect our border. Even he's kind of saying like, oh no, they can come into Mexico now. So there's that element to it. Yeah. And I think on the drug war, you know, and I can see myself going either way on this, is to say, look, the hardline militaristic response to the drug war is kind of not helping out anything. You know, he didn't save like all the hundreds of thousands of people being killed since you started this war. His whole thing is, I think his policy has this stupid name, like hugs, not bullets.
Okay. That always worked. Yeah, with fucking gangsters. Yeah, that works like a charm. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, his attitude's like, oh, well, you know, we'd still punish the heavy hitters, but low-level guys, we're not going to do shit. And then we'll refuse any CIA or American military intervention or whatever financing of this war stuff. So whatever, you know, that's, you know, those have the makings for something kind of dull. But you know, at the end of the day, I'm looking at this guy. It's like, okay, I'm not seeing I'm not basically seeing Allende walking again. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. Look, the socialists in Latin America, at least in Chile, I can speak with some authority, or not authority, but at least some knowledge of that. Look, the socialists in Latin America and Chile, and probably Mexico, I'm assuming, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a moment when they realized, holy shit, the jig is up. You know, we cannot espouse old school Soviet hardcore socialism because we look like fools. Because the historical example of the Soviet Union's collapse, I'm not expressing myself very well. What I'm trying to say is that, see, in Latin America, the impact of that collapse was enormous, much greater than in the United States. Because in the United States, there was always the conception, and in Eastern and Western Europe, there's always the conception that the Soviet Union pretty much sucked and didn't deliver. But in Latin America, there was the illusion that it actually did deliver for the people. And when the Warsaw Pact nations and the Soviet Union collapsed so completely and utterly into complete chaos, there was always a sudden a realization that, economically at least, socialism just does not work. And to claim otherwise is ridiculous. And at the time, the neoliberal paradigm, see, that's part of the reason that the socialists in Chile, for instance, hate Pinochet so much, because he bet on the neoliberal economic paradigm, and it turned out to be the right bet. And the socialists have never gotten over the fact that the neoliberals were, on the economic front, so right. Now, you can argue, as I argue, that neoliberalism has had its day in the sun, and it's just not working anymore because it's created income and wealth disparities that are creating unsustainable tensions in our society. And I'm talking about the Western democracies, right? You can argue that. That's what I argue, as a matter of fact. It doesn't mean that I think that neoliberalism is bad and socialism good. No, I'm saying that neoliberalism had its moment. But socialists don't see it that way. They view neoliberalism as the winning side. And the socialists are all in favor of being on the winning side, okay? And so they have adopted wholesale neoliberal economic policies. That's why you always hear these guys talking about socialism and shit, but really espousing neoliberal economic policies. And at most, they'll say that we have to tinker with it and fix it here and there, but their socialism is more social socialism than economic socialism, if you can see the distinction.
I do. Yeah.
And so what's happened is that the people who call themselves socialists are just, milquetoast. They're milquetoast on the economic front, but on the social front, they double down. It's basically, the exact opposite of what the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact countries were. Those countries were more nationalistic than the socialists of today. The socialists of today, the reformed socialists, quote unquote, they are, multi-culti SJWs. They're fucking crazy, okay, in that regard. But insofar as the economic policies are concerned, they're not going to do fucking shit. They're just going to talk a big game, probably, but at the end of the day, they won't do anything because they don't have the intellectual self-confidence. The collapse of the Soviet Union ripped away the economic foundation of their socialist belief, and they have yet to find another set of beliefs that can that can fill in that gaping hole in their ideology. You see what I'm trying to say?
I do, and I think what you brought up a good point, which is a lot of, in some regards, is the key to how a lot of these socialist nations, even the sort of communist nations, were able to prop themselves up for so long. Is that there was a lot of gibs that the Soviet Union gave, above and beyond, like you said, the psychological belief that, hey, the Soviet Union's still there, so clearly it must be working. When the Soviet Union was doing pretty decently, so particularly in the 70s, 60s, whatnot, largely, I think, from their minerals and petroleum exports, they were able to subsidize all sorts of shit for other countries, be it like exports of goods, weapons, all these other things you could think of to kind of prop up these states. Cuba was survived because of that for a long time. Soviet military bases were there. Once the Soviet Union is gone, and frankly, like right when the Warsaw Pact countries are going up, they're like, hey, we can't afford this shit no more, guys. So sorry, you're kind of on your own. When that shit dries up, they're like, oh fuck, what are we left to do? And to your point, it adds insult to injury when Pinochet says like, oh, I brought some guys from the University of Chicago over. We're doing okay. How about that, you son of a bitch?
Exactly. Okay. They hate Pinochet because he was successful. He was a successful dictator who overall did very good for his country. Okay, that's why the socialists hate him. They don't hate Stroessner. Stroessner was a bloodthirsty bastard and corrupt and an awful guy. He was the dictator of Paraguay for like 30 years. He was corrupt. He was bloodthirsty. He really did kill a whole boatload of fucking commies and shit. They don't hate him that much. They hate Pinochet because he was successful, because he was right. But look, insofar as López-Obrador is concerned, right, I'm not really concerned about the economic part because, like I said, these socialists, they're scared shitless about talking about economics. And Venezuela, every country in Latin America is experiencing an arrival of Venezuelans. And they all tell the same story, that it's a shithole. Okay, and the people who are leaving Venezuela are like the best people. Okay, and therefore arriving in Mexico, arriving in Chile, there are a whole boatload of Venezuelans in Chile now. And they are hardworking, industrious people who just want to do good by their families, right? And they don't want to hear anything about any fucking socialism or shit like that, right? And so the brand of socialism, insofar as the economic front is concerned, forget about it. Nobody takes them seriously insofar as the economics is concerned. So they have to sell the whole social shit. Now, this is interesting because I think it plays into immigration. I bet you Mexico becomes a funnel for migrants from Central and South America, Northern South America specifically, and I mean Colombia, Venezuela, Central America, for all these people to get into the United States. I have no doubt in my mind that López Obrador is going to basically throw open the southern border with the understanding, okay, all you fucking people can come into Mexico with the understanding you have to go all the way to the northern border. I wouldn't be surprised if the guy starts setting up buses to bring the people from the southern border to the northern border, which is going to be fucking nasty. And he'll probably play the game of, give me aid or I'll send you refugees. Or not refugees. Precisely. I mean, they're migrants. These people are not refugees. They are not running from a fucking war. These people are fucking economic migrants who want to live in a country where they can make more money and send the money home to the folks back home because these people don't want to leave. Okay. So anyway, that's my.
Well, that's precisely it, and I think that kind of talk's already sort of happening, because the conversations between López Obrador and Trump have already kind of started on the, hey, we'll control for immigration if we have some economic development coming. In other words, give me money and I will keep the people away from you. It's a bribe to keep it away. And what's funny is like the sad part is like to a certain degree is I'm looking at Obrador's position or López Obrador's positions over the history. There should have been plenty of stuff for him and Trump to get in common over. And this goes to the whole, against neoliberalism, the left and right should have room to bond over, because there's two economic positions that López Obrador has had over time that would have been kind of friendly to Trump. One was he's kind of economic nationalistic. By that, he means he thinks that Mexico should be self-sufficient to the degree to which that is possible. And two, he says, look, Mexico didn't get a great deal out of NAFTA more than anyone else, in part because he was showing that certain industries in Mexico, particularly certain agricultures like I think avocado farmers, corn farming, they got fucked over because, funny enough, the United States ships over a lot of shit to them as well. So, to a certain extent, he could easily have said, look, economic policy wise, I get where you're coming from. We have reasons to renegotiate NAFTA. Let's talk, let's hamper a deal out there. But as soon as he fucking won office, the first thing he says, like, I'm softening my positions on NAFTA. He didn't say that directly, but more or less that's what he is. Like, NAFTA is kind of a good thing. It's a tendency, like you said, every time a socialist gets into the fucking job, when it comes to the real meat and potatoes of what socialism actually means, fuck that. Can't do it. But we'll do the other squishy shit.
Yeah.
And I think his big thing that he's probably going to try and bank on is the whole, and probably why he won, frankly, is this whole fighting corruption and fighting the drug war better than his predecessors have. And which is, I can tell you right now, anytime anybody ever tells me they're going to fight corruption, I said, you are going to fail miserably.
Well, I don't know about that, but perhaps I'm slightly more optimistic than you on that front. But insofar as the drug war is concerned, look, what has to happen is pretty obvious. What has to happen is a legalization of opioids, legalization of all this shit. Okay, legalization, taxation, turn it into a fucking business. Now the marijuana industry, that's a test case, and it's looking awfully fucking good. The people who are starting to work on the marijuana firms, right? They're all sensible people. They're taxpayers. They're doing the thing properly. I mean, you don't hear anybody shooting each other up over fucking marijuana now, do you? Right? They used to, but not anymore. Because now that it's been legal and turned into a business, everything's fine. Everything's operating smoothly. It is a smooth business. And people are buying their marijuana, getting high, and the people manufacturing the marijuana and distributing it and selling it, they're all making good money. They're all paying their taxes. Everybody is fucking happy. So I think it's inevitable that the same attitude is going to percolate towards other controlled substances. I personally am against them. Okay, I'm against legalization on moral grounds. I think that a lot of this stuff, for the same reason that I'm against the legalization of homosexuality, I think a lot of times you have to have rules so that people know what the limits are. And if you have a segment of the population that's going to break those rules, you're always going to have that segment. But to allow the whole society to break those rules, those moral standards, I think for the society in the long run is a bad thing. But that's my thinking. But I'm in an extreme minority here, and I recognize that. So the reality is, the political reality is that I would guess that about 5 years, 10 years on the very outside, every fucking illegal drug is going to be legal. And what's going to happen is that the whole thing is going to be corporatized. It's going to be a business. There's not going to be any more violence, which is a good thing, because a lot of innocent people got their heads chopped off, and not to mention tortured horribly before they got their heads chopped off. Right? I mean, these fuckers are just savages, right? But it's all going to be legal. It's all going to be corporatized. It's all going to be a safe, placid little industry. I can't wait for that day to come here quick enough. Even though I'm against it, I recognize the political reality, and I also recognize the fact that legalization will diminish violence, because the violence is just out of control, especially in Mexico.
Well, that was the thing I was kind of struggling with for him, because on a superficial level, I'm more or less aligned with you in the sense that, to a certain degree, legalization makes sense, if only because I take an Augustinian point of view, which is St. Augustine, I mind you, which is there are certain vices and sins which don't rank high enough to merit a response. I think pot smoking, while annoying, certainly is kind of like that to a certain degree. Some other drugs are. But the thing is, the violence in Mexico seems to me have been so dramatic, so extensive, so persistent, and, almost vendetta based now, that it's hard. It's almost, even though it's still fundamentally based around making money off of this shit, I think there has to be some degree to which it scarred you so psychologically so much that the vendetta you would have against the various groups and perpetrators have, superseded the economic foundations of it. You know what I mean? By that, I mean, even if you legalized everything, I would be so pissed off about the people who killed the people I know, or the people who took shots at my side, or what have you, that could you really de-escalate at that point? You know what I mean? Is it so ingrained in the anger you have,
Well,
such that legalization is going to stop it?
yeah. Legalization would stop it. I think that, yeah, sure, you might have a little bit of a tailwind of violence, but that's just flat out revenge over shit that happened in the past. But that's relatively short lived. Okay, it's not going to be like long lived thing. No. It'll legalization and corporatization of the whole thing. It's going to be a good business for everybody involved. Okay. I for one, would definitely be investing in that. And it's sort of like, on the one hand, it's kind of like immoral to be investing in drugs that harm our fellow man. But on the other hand, it's going to be a good fucking business. And I own shares in Atria. So you know what I'm saying? It's
Well, hey, I mean, my investments in tobacco for a long time did well by me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to a certain extent, I'm not going to, bitch about it.
Yeah.
It's just what I just frankly don't know is the degree to which the vendetta shit is going to be harsh. But I can believe that. Yeah, we'll get over it. Once we're all making money, we'll get over it.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's just hard to believe, just given how fucking insane the shit was. I mean, like when you talk about what the MS-13 was doing and all the other cartels, it's like above and beyond just shooting a guy in the head because he's fucking with your hustle.
Mhm.
We're talking about like literally tearing people to shreds, men, women, and children. It's like you wonder. It's like if the business is really motivating it at that point. It's kind of the only reason I bring in hesitation.
Well, no. It also, what happens is that inevitably horrible human beings gravitate towards that business because it gives them license to do whatever the fuck they want. So what will happen is that once the business becomes corporatized, those people are going to be sort of like adrift, and they'll be easier to pick off insofar as law enforcement is concerned. Okay, because these guys might be, nasty customers with a gun, but they don't know shit from Shinola insofar as a nice corporate office is concerned. So they're not going to be around much longer. Look, this is just like Prohibition. The fucking gangsters were neck deep in this shit, but once Prohibition ended, who took over? Fucking corporate people, and they corporatized the thing, and the gangsters were left with nothing. You know what I'm saying? So yeah.
Well, that's actually an interesting question because I actually want. I mean, this is tangentially going back to the United States, but one of the things I have been concerned about legalization. Not because I've had the libertarian view for a while that says like, well, you're not going to fight the war by, continuing to make it a profitable business for people who are awful. So if you legalize it, you end their profits. But the worry I have is that, okay, let's say, you get rid of it, but hey, this is the only income for a lot of people in shitty neighborhoods, be they Hispanic, Black, even frankly white in some instances. What do you think?
Lots of whites.
What do you think an armed populace with nothing to do and no jobs are going to do?
They'll be easy to clean up by law enforcement. It'll be easy because they won't have money. You cut off their money supply, and their power is gone, because their power doesn't come from the gun. It comes from the money that they can pay off people. Okay? Once they don't have the money to pay off people, then all bets are off. Then it's over. That's game over for gangsters. I mean, think of it like, I'm no criminal expert, but think about it from a business point of view. Who do you take seriously? The guy who shows up who's got a 9-figure checkbook. That's the guy you take seriously. Guy who shows up who's got a couple of $100 and a gun, you don't take him seriously. Yeah, you're afraid because he's got a gun. But the second you're out of his sight, you're free as a bird, right? See, these guys, the drug dealers, right? Their power doesn't come from their willingness to use violence. Their power comes from the fact that they can pay off people. That's always been the source of people's power, okay? The ability to pay off people, okay? If someone's income depends on you, they are your slave. You can do whatever the fuck you want, okay? But if you exert power only by way of violence, if you're just a gangster, but no money is coming from you towards your victims, then the victim is going to eventually revolt, right? See, that's the thing that's going on here. See, these drug dealers, cartels and such, they pay off people. I mean, shit, everybody in Colombia loved Pablo Escobar, because he gave money to the people, lots of money, I mean, he built zoos, and he would invite them over to see his fucking hippopotami or whatever the fuck, right? And he would bring people in. He would throw big parties for everybody. I mean, like with hundreds and possibly thousands of people, big old barbecues with the kids and the whole thing. And he paid them off. He would give them money, okay, salaries, okay. And so, of course, they were loyal to him. They loved him. He was a folk hero because he paid them money. And he died while he was still paying them money. You know, he got shot up by the Colombian army or whatever the hell, right? But insofar as once that money spigot is over, people aren't going to care. You know?
Yeah, but here's the thing: it's not the Pablo Escobars that I'm worried about. It's the capos and the lower level guys who are basically out of a job and got nothing. They're armed but got nothing to lose. No, in the same way, but it's in the same way.
Yeah, they'll
in the same way that it's still a problem. In the same way that we had talked about it before. If you take all of let's say you take any industry in the United States. Let's say you take all of the not cab drivers, the truck drivers in the United States and say tomorrow all your jobs are automated. You're out of a fucking job. Go take a hike. Mm-hmm. That's a potential disaster.
That's going to happen, by the way.
Which I do think is going to happen. Unfortunately, I think we may have talked about that on air. I forgot, but I'm listening and all the people developing this shit, and they're developing it, and they don't know what the consequences are, and they're kind of scared, but they're still developing it anyway.
Oh yeah.
Along similar lines, if you remove that economic capability from them, and basically say you have nothing left and nothing left to lose, dangerous shit can happen.
Yeah.
In the same way, that's what I'm kind of worried about in Mexico is like if it's large enough, there's no money, but you still have means to fuck with people. What could potentially happen? That's my biggest worry. Not saying I'm right. I'm just saying
it's a justifiable worry, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. Look, going back to López-Obrador and the rising tide of leftists, right? I think we're going to see more of this shit. We're going to see more of these fucking leftists taking over, and like I said, they are scared of rocking the economic boat. Shit, we had 4 fucking presidents, socialist presidents in Chile. We had fucking Michelle Bachelet, 2 terms, okay, 2 non-consecutive terms. We had what was the name of the son of a bitch? We had
Lagos.
Lagos, right? He's fucking ugh. And what was the other one? No, not Frei Ristigli, who was a Christian Democrat. But anyway, look, we had 3 of the socialist fucks, right? And these fuckers, right? They claim to be socialists. They were fucking capitalists to the bone, man. And they kept talking that they were going to, quote unquote, reform the system. They never did shit, okay? Because the system was working fine, okay? The thing that they were like really hot to trot was the pension system. And for a while, they were like, oh, we got to nationalize the pension system. We got to nationalize the pension system. Because they had successfully fooled people into believing that the retirement savings that people were contributing to their accounts was owned by these corporations that managed the money. Until these corporations got wise and said, what the fuck are we doing? And they launched this big PR campaign to re-educate people into understanding. See, in the private pension fund system in Chile, you own the money. You simply decide which company is going to manage it for you, but it's your money. It's your account, okay? And you can withdraw the money before you turn 65. If you do so, you get a penalty from the government, not these companies that manage it. You get a penalty and you don't get any income. You don't get any pension at the end of the day, okay? Early withdrawal, you just get penalized. But you get the whole money because it's yours. It's your savings, right? And when people realize that, they're like, oh, wait. So if we nationalize it, the government would take my money? And that was the end of any kind of effort to reform the system, right? Because the AFP system in Chile is actually very good. And it should have been the model for the Western democracies, but politically, only a dictator could pass that system. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that, see, these socialist presidents in Chile, they just talked a big game. At the end of the day, none of them were fucking socialists. And so they pushed the social shit, okay? And the social changes in Chile were noticeable because of these socialist presidents. They changed it, they liberalized it, they made it more libertine societies, to their detriment, I think. I mean, my personal opinion is that it was a mistake. I mean, the socialist presidents, They pushed homosexual rights, but not just homosexual rights. They pushed like homosexual acceptance, and they pushed the slutification of women. And it was really interesting to watch it happen, because in the United States, you see, I didn't see it happen. It just sort of like happened around me. I didn't really notice it because I didn't have the wherewithal to notice what was happening. But in Chile, it was a much more conservative country in 2000 than by 2018. It's just a radically different country insofar as the societal norms are concerned. What is socially acceptable? In 2000, it was sort of like risque for a girl to be fucking her boyfriend, and openly acknowledging it. Now they're fucking sluts, okay? Which I think is bad for the society overall, but I think it is a direct result of the socialist social norms that were implemented. You see what I'm trying to say? I'm not very eloquent, sorry.
No, it is. I get it. That's pretty much how a lot of the Western Europeans are like. But I guess here's my question: is like, what is the appeal then of just saying, here's these socialists, we're running as socialists, we're part of the Socialist International? Are they like campaigning on that, or are they campaigning on like, oh, homosexuality is a fun thing, be who you are?
Socialist kind of International, and kind of like they're complaining about the economic problems, but they're not pushing forward any kind of real solution. They're just complainers, okay? Because it's sort of like, and that's my objection to Trump. See, he's fundamentally right insofar as the disease, but he's not pushing any cure that's worth a damn, okay? I always refer to Trump's Republican National Convention speech, which was terrific because it nailed the problems that are going on in America, nailed them to a T. But he wasn't pushing any kind of solution to these problems. He was just identifying the problems correctly, but no solution. That's the same with the socialists. They can identify the problems with neoliberalism, but they cannot posit realistic solutions to it. And for them to peddle, socialism and big government just sounds stupid. Because a lot of people recognize that the governments are in bed with all these neoliberal corporations. The neoliberal governments are in bed with the corporations, rather. And they are helping them along. It's fascism, really. That's what it is. Neoliberalism has become fascist in the strict technical sense of the government and industry working in tandem to their benefit and to the detriment of the people. But
well, that has a long history to it, because this will get a little bit historically technical. So if you want to snooze at this point, you can. I actually find it interesting. Yeah, so the social democracies like that, those existed as a third way compromise between three different poles after World War II, particularly in Europe, especially when everybody's worried, oh shit, Europe looks like a fucking basket case. We don't know if the United States is going to stick around. What the fuck is going to happen? Well, the compromise was this. We're going to find the middle ground between fascism, capitalism, and socialism by having the social democracy, which was effectively, you still have more or less a capitalist system run around, but the government kind of manages it and redistributes it based on social grounds, but it's still somewhat of a nation-oriented thing as opposed to a true fucking international type system, or like some sort of Marxist revolutionary thing. So the idea was, okay, we'll have little bits and pieces of each, and we'll stabilize everything, and we won't go crazy blaming people and sides for this, that, and the other. And it's okay. We'll manage our way through it. Yeah. And the fact that America was throwing a lot of money at it so that people wouldn't get cozy up too close to Moscow, hey, that's just fucking power for the course, right? And that was a compromise that you made for a long time. And you're right. You're fundamentally right when you say there's a certain degree to which the fascist kind of corporate mentality of the state and the economy or the capitalist system kind of working together to manage everything, was kind of valid. That is how they did it. The fundamental problem is that eventually they ran out of coal to fuel that fire.
Well, yeah, but I don't know. Look, I have a very negative view of the situation, and I think that the only solution moving into the future is decentralization and balkanization. I think that is the solution. But of course, that kind of solution is not going to be peaceably arrived at, okay? It's going to be either some kind of cataclysmic war or internal struggle of some sort, or more likely, just a slow grinding down, because you can recognize that the system, the neoliberal system, it's just not working anymore. It's on its last legs, and they are doing heroic measures to keep it propped up. Yeah, I don't see how things are gonna. I'm black pilled as fuck today. I mean, I woke up just.
Here's the other question I have. I know you are. I'm trying to limit the number of episodes we have that involve black pill in the title. But here's a good question. Like, okay, so yes, you have socialists left, right, and center across Latin America, Central America, South America. Yeah, they're getting victories here, there, and the other. How are they making an appeal when one, Venezuela exists in the shithole state that it does, and two, you're getting, as you said, for lack of a better term, refugees from Venezuela saying it's a shithole. It's a fucking shithole. We don't have water. We have to we don't have toilet paper, motherfucker.
Yeah.
We're deciding whether or not you can subsist on cockroaches, and then someone says, you know what, we need socialism. I mean, I say that we hear that in America too, right? I mean, you have the appeal of the Bernie Sanders type, but I get a rough sense in America it's partly a frustration of
it's frustration.
I want whatever is different.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's whatever is different, because people are sick and tired of this neoliberal paradigm. They're sick of it because it doesn't work for the common people anymore. It used to, but not anymore. Because like all systems, look, human beings change. We're not static, okay? So a system can be perfectly fine for a period of time and eventually run its course and no longer be effective, even though it's the same system as before, okay? The same things happen with neoliberalism. It's run its course, okay? And the people who are in power, they are in power because of the neoliberal system. They've been able to, even the ones who claim to be socialists have somehow made their peace with the neoliberal paradigm, and they're able to work it and stay in place and be successful. So they don't want to change it. Nobody wants to really change it. And yet at the same time, I mean, not certainly the people in positions of power, but at the same time, they recognize that it's not working anymore. Trump is an expression of this. López-Obrador is an expression of this. People recognize that the system doesn't work anymore, but they don't know how to change it, or they're afraid to change it, okay? Because, if this system doesn't work and socialism doesn't work, then what are we supposed to do? What kind of system are we supposed to implement? And I think that that's the problem, that people don't know what system to implement to replace neoliberalism. But they want something different.
Well, here's what's particularly curious in Latin America to me then. And maybe this is just me talking out of ignorance. You may know better than I do, but I'm interested in knowing. It just doesn't seem like, because when you're in that situation where it's like anything but what I got is better. It seems to me that, yes, you would have socialists doing well in there, but you would also seem to have hard right or, stronger right guys than the center right shit that we've dealt with, Christian Democratic Union type bullshit. It doesn't seem to be readily noticeable in Latin America, this kind of hard right shift. Is it? Am I missing it? If it doesn't exist, why the hell not? Because it seems like it has just as good a excuse to exist there as in the United States, or frankly in Western Europe.
Well, that's an interesting thing. You're talking, how come there aren't like hard rightists in Latin America just as there are hard rightists in the United States and to a certain extent in Western Europe who are dissatisfied with neoliberalism? That's what you're asking, right?
Yes.
That's a very good question. I think what happens is that a lot of hard rightists are still, in Latin America, are still like, okay, we got to work with this neoliberal system. They don't see a distinction. They're not yet that dissatisfied with it because it still kind of works for them. Okay. Latin America, look, you got to understand something else that's important. See, the neoliberal paradigm works really well if you're a hard worker. Okay, if you're a hard worker, and more importantly, if you're surrounded by a bunch of people who are fundamentally lazy. Okay, now I'm from Latin America, so I can say this with impunity, and I'm not going to get shot at by the political correctness police. And that is, most people in Latin America are fucking lazy. They are lazy bums who don't want to work. Okay, so if you have, out of 10 people, only 2 really want to work. Those 2 are going to be very successful. And they could be like really hard right, Okay. But if they're making good money, all good. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're not totally satisfied with the system, because the system is allowing them to succeed, because all the other people are fucking bums. They're fucking lazy. And this is true. Look, how can I put this? I don't know why this is the case. I'm sure that wiser men than I have figured out an explanation to this. All I can tell you is my observation. Most people in Latin America are lazy. Simple as that. The hardworking ones tend to live in inhospitable climes. In the very south of Chile, the people there are very industrious, probably because they don't have any other option. They have to be very industrious to keep themselves warm and alive, keep body and soul together. But in the rest of the country, people are bums. They're lazy. They don't fix shit, But then again, I used to think that it was like a Latin American thing, but here I am in Ukraine. And here, they're fucking lazy too. Like, for instance, I live in a fairly nice neighborhood here in Kharkov, and I walk, it's about a 10, 15-minute walk, depending on how fast I go, from my apartment to my office. And I make this trip 2-4 times a day, depending. And anyway, I am walking along, and it's a nice neighborhood near the university, okay? And the university is very prestigious in regional, and so there are a lot of students from all over the place, and there's a lot of money, and it's a nice area, is what I'm trying to say, right? And I was passing by this one street corner, and there was this broken bottle. Some kids were partying, and they broke some beer bottle. And that broken beer bottle has been there for fucking 4 days because nobody's, cleaning it up, okay? And that's the whole thing, Kharkov, the whole fucking city. It's kind of like it looks run down, even though there are new buildings and shit like that, because nobody takes care of it, because they're fundamentally lazy. Because nobody thinks to themselves, oh, I'm going to clean it up. You ask me why don't I clean it up? Well, I'm just passing by some street corner. The owner of that street corner, the one who has a business there on that street corner, he's the one who should do it. Or the city street sweepers, right? Okay, suppose there are no city street sweepers. Shouldn't the guy who is operating that business on the corner, just to tidy up his little corner, shouldn't he be the one to clean it up? Yeah, you would think so. But the guy isn't going to do it because he's lazy. Because he figures out, I'm making money anyway. Why should I bother? And the effort is so marginal that I'm not going to bother, and so he doesn't. You see what I mean? It's a mentality. I think that what happens, and this we're going to move into some nasty eugenics territory. Probably people are going to say, but anyway, in the United States, who went to the United States? Who went to North America? The people who wanted to make money, who wanted to succeed, who wanted a better life for themselves. That's the people who went. Irish, Polish, Ukrainian. By the way, I walk around the streets of Ukraine, and there are so many people who look just like Americans, right? And of course, because there are so many Ukrainians who went to America, and they were the smart ones, the hardworking ones, the ones who would break their backs for a little scrap of land to make something out of themselves, right? So yeah, the people in the United States, they are the descendants of more hardworking people. And the lazier people stayed in wherever the fuck they were, right? And that's the reality of it. That's the hard reality of it, and it's an ugly reality because it all kinds of nasty ideas of eugenics and Nazis and shit like that rise unbidden in your memory, right? But it's the truth,
But here's the thing about that, and I was listening intently to what you were saying. In theory, how I would imagine that played out, would still necessitate in my mind a hard right response is going to come, and I would play it out this way. In theory, what would happen in that situation when, you have a few industrious people, but mostly lazy people, so those few industrious people can say, fuck it, easy pickings, and I'm going to make some money off of that. Invariably, what I would imagine happening is this, a lazy-minded person, or at least someone who thinks your bad lot in life is not your fault, it's some other motherfucker's fault, namely those industrious guys. Mm-hmm. Fuck them. Here come the socialists. We're going to tax those motherfuckers and punish those guys. Well, when the economy tanks or is punished for that, or those guys feel the pinch of someone trying to fuck with their money, eventually you're going to get a weird right-wing response. It's just going to happen.
Well, yeah, the thing is that socialists don't go fucking with the guys who are making the money. Not now, not anymore. They used to.
That's where I'm going.
Yeah, they used to. Okay? Back in the day when socialism had some real cachet. But now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you got to understand the collapse of the Soviet Union for Latin America was cataclysmic, okay? Because all of a sudden, it was like those damn Yankees were right, okay? That's the thing, because in Latin America, there was the conception, the belief that Russia was some sort of socialist paradise. There really was. The propaganda worked in South America, you know? And there were a lot of people who were aiming to build that socialist utopia in Latin America. I mean, Che Guevara and all the rest of it, right? The people really thought that everything was hunky-dory in the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact nations. And when they saw that it was just a bullshit, no socialist who did not reform had any political credibility, reform being embrace wholeheartedly neoliberal economic policies. Because in 1990, 89, 90, 91, those 3 years, when people saw the collapse, you know what was really shocking to people in Chile? It was when they opened the border between, I think it was Hungary and Austria. And so what happened was that a whole bunch of East Germans went to Hungary and then crossed the border to Austria, and from Austria to West Germany, right? And this was in 89, I think, before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And what happened was that, I think it was August of 89. And what happens is there were so many East German refugees that they had to sleep in the subway stations in West Germany. There were just too many people who were just showing up, right? And those pictures of all those people sleeping in the subway, all of them refugees from East Germany, going to West Germany. And the West Germans, of course, welcoming them with open arms because they were their brothers, right? When that happened, in Chile at least, the socialists were like, holy shit, things are not like they claim. And I remember very clearly there was this old school communist. I forget the name of the son of a bitch. His name was like Vladimir or something like that. I'm trying to remember his name. I'll remember it in about 5 minutes. Anyway, this old school commie, he came back from East Germany at that time and says, oh, everything's fine in East Germany. And they made cartoons about him, of like how full of shit he was, because people were seeing the news, right? And that changed. That changed everything, those images. And so no socialist in Chile who, pushed for economic socialism ever stood a chance, because everybody would just laugh at him, okay? That's the thing. That's why there's no real economic socialism. They can call it socialism all they want, but everybody knows it's just, so far as economics is concerned, it's all bullshit, This is a long-winded reply, but I hope I answered your question.
Here's the reason why I bring this up, and it's me potentially, and I don't even know if I'll succeed, salvaging a white pill out of this situation.
Yeah.
By that, I simply mean this. I think, especially with not just in Latin America, not just with Mexico, but also with folks like, whatever her name was in the Bronx who won her seat. Ocasio-Cortez. Is socialism on the rise? Are they going to take everything from us? Inherently, this is my response. There's no true socialist, exactly like you said, precisely because they have already made their deal with the neoliberal economic policy. That's not going to change. So I don't think you're going to be in a situation where you're going to see dramatic, like just seizing of wealth per se. But what will the main focus remain? I don't know the exact situation of Latin America, but what I will say is this, exactly, kind of what you were hinting at before, that they'll focus it all on, minority identitarianism, minority rights, the rights of everybody to be Americans, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So, the situation, one, has not changed. Two, the other thing I'd like to remind people of, for those who think that the right and left can unite on this, against neoliberalism, keep a straight face and say, stick with the right wing side, because the left wing is not really fighting neoliberalism. They'll play with the game against like who gets to be the top leaders and who gets to be the front people on the left wing parties. Ain't gonna fucking change the fundamental economic system. That's the only people who are gonna do any.
I disagree.
Only people you're gonna do is the right. No, okay. Tell me your argument.
Yeah, my thinking is that in the United States they are going to change. Yeah, they are, because the neoliberals are stupidly, they are trying to smother the right wing critique of neoliberalism. Okay, And so the only critique that will remain is the hard socialist one. And yeah, shit, some of the lefties are finding that Bernie is not left enough, you know? You heard that? It's fucking funny. You know, Bernie Sanders is not left enough for some socialists in America now. Okay, they want something harder, like Ocasio-Cortez, even though Ocasio-Cortez is just, you know, she's a suburban girl, right? A neoliberal suburban girl, even though she pretends otherwise. But anyway, look, in the United States, does not have a memory of viewing the Soviet Union as a hero and therefore watching its collapse and realizing it was all bullshit. There was no disillusionment. The United States always knew that the Soviet Union was full of shit, okay? At least the political leadership of the United States always knew that the Soviet Union was full of shit. And the press, they were cold warriors because they agreed. They saw that, you know, the Soviet Union was just, you know, a lying sack of shit. And the killing of civilians and the whole thing, you know, the starvation of Ukrainians and blah, blah. In the United States, there was always this conception that you know, socialism, bad. And so when it collapsed, it was like, you know, just so story. But see, the young people today don't have that moment of disillusionment. They don't see it, okay? And so for them, they are virgins to the reality of socialism. So that's why they're espousing it. And socialism is gonna have a rising tide. I mean, no question about it. It's gonna start going up and up and up, and we're gonna start seeing it with what you call it. We're seeing it now with Ocasio-Cortez, and in, like I said before, in some of the safer Democratic seats, you're gonna start seeing more and more socialists. Okay, and I think that these socialists, the gerrymandering is the problem, because in a gerrymandered district where you have a safe Democratic seat, the only people who are going to be critiquing the neoliberal paradigm are going to be socialists. So they're going to start to win. I think in the midterm, we're going to see more.
I sort of disagree with this in the sense that, well, first off, the ignorance of the young with regard to socialism is no more true in the United States than it is in Latin America. Right? I mean, they're still just as ignorant. But besides that point, I still think you'll get more socialist rhetoric for sure, but it still feels like it's going to be fundamentally hollow to me.
No, there's a difference. There's a difference. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you say that
you're not sorry to interrupt. I know you're not.
Okay, no, but I just want to clarify something. See, there's a problem because in Latin America, the political parties and the whole place, there's much more conversation between generations, and the historic memory of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc is passed down. Okay. So it's a different paradigm, because here in the United States there is no memory between generations. In Latin America there is. Memory and experience is passed down. It's passed down in like the coffee clashes where they hang out, you know, the barbecues, they hang out and they have a bottle of wine and they start shooting the breeze and talking about the old days. And these stories, they get repetitive because they keep on saying the same goddamn stories every fucking time. But precisely because they are repetitive, the lesson gets taught. The socialism economically did not work. A neoliberal economic paradigm did work. Yeah, I mean, that's something that you don't see in the U.S. You don't see people, political operatives in the U.S., the older generation, telling the younger generation. It's the younger generation usually comes around and revolutionizes the place, like Ocasio-Cortez. You see what I'm saying? So I don't think that there's that memory, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah, but you got to listen. If you listen to the nature of how they articulate the us versus them, you do not see class warfare, really. You do not see the proletariat rising against the per se. No, but I don't think you're even going to get it. I think it's going to be framed this way. It's going to be certain identities are inherently challenged by the certain white men. By that, I mean, let me put it this way. If would let's say Octavia Cortez or whatever,
Ocasio-Cortez.
I so hate her. I don't even care to pronounce her name correctly. Okay. So because put a thought experiment from her. If you could say to her, you could nationalize Google.
Yeah.
Or you can nationalize Facebook, or you could put a Latina in charge of Facebook and Google. She will always put a Latina in charge.
Yeah.
As opposed to nationalizing every single time. That's why I say the socialism isn't real.
Yeah.
Because if it was real, she would have nationalized them.
Yeah,
She won't.
well, yeah, but the thing is, see, it's that socialism worldwide has become just identity politics. Okay.
Well, that's why I say it's fake socialism. I mean, it has some rhetoric of it, but I think it's fundamentally vacuous. And it's because the fundamental core of socialism is gone.
Well, yeah, I mean, socialism is gone with the Soviet Union. It's not coming back. Yeah, I mean, but identity politics is its replacement. Because fundamentally, look, there are always going to be a large segment of the population who are unhappy with their lot and they blame other people. Ultimately, that's the problem, what we're talking about. But it's an issue of human nature. There are always going to be people who blame others for their misfortune, just as there are always going to be people like you and me who think that by their own gumption they can make it, and their problems are their own fault. Okay, because I would venture to guess that you, Benway, believe that any problem that you have is your own fault, your own poor decisions, and that if you just work hard enough, you can fix those poor decisions or that bad luck. Right? That's what I personally think, and I think that most people on the right think that way. And that's the mentality. That's the core difference. Other people, I mean, socialists, left-wing people, they always blame some other person for their faults. You know, that's the reality of human nature. That's why we consistently fall into these patterns. One is like, get over yourself, suck it up, do the job. And the other is like, give me money. I'm hurt and you have to give me, It's that's my thinking. I don't know if you agree with me or not on that.
So there's a large amount of that, which is true. I do think that way. There's a certain degree of self-reliance that is fundamentally part of the character. But I think what's going to be core to the right succeeding is to not give way into the pure atomized, libertarian-esque, neoliberalist, like it's the individual, goddamn it, and only this, that, and the other. There's still a society. Yeah. Of which you are a participant that you have to be mindful of, which isn't about materialistic, limiting it all down to we have to have certain handouts and everything. No, there's actually a world that you are building that's above and beyond just money. Mm-hmm. It's about like a morality, the desire to procreate, to continue this society's existence, as opposed to being, like the little fish on the bottom of the ocean, wondering who gets a bit, the cut of the fucking chubs today. Now that's the old socialist vision, if I'm being very crude about it, but I think it's not completely off the reservation to say that's what it was. Yeah. I think the right has to kind of thread the needle between the two poles, which is to say, not necessarily say that the individual is worthless and fuck you, it's all a collective mentality, but at the same time not say, there's no such thing as society. It's just fuck you. What do you mean I can't sell my child on the black market and get money for kidneys and whatnot? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, look, my thinking is that the thing that will save the right, though I don't know if they'll do it, is to abandon this notion that the individual is the basis of society and say that the family, the nuclear family, is the basis of society. I don't think that the right will do it. The hard right will. The hard right will get behind that because they believe it. But the electable left, if they don't get behind that notion, I'm so fucking black-pilled. That's the thing. Insofar as politics is concerned and the future, I'm very red-pilled in my personal stuff. I'm very anti-nihilism insofar as my personal advice. After all, my channel is all about giving personal advice to young men, not societal advice. Because whenever I think of society, or our current society and our historical trajectory, I just get black-pilled as fuck, right? I can be red-pilled, i.e. non-nihilistic, when non-apocalyptic, when I'm talking about people, about individuals, about individual young men. But when I think of our current society, the Western democracies, I'm just very pessimistic in thinking that the whole thing is just going to go up in flames. Because the people running things, they don't fucking know what the fuck they're doing, And they don't understand, my thinking is that they don't understand that neoliberalism had its moment in the sun. And we have to move to a different paradigm because this paradigm is hurting people. And the left is exploiting it by way of identity politics because it's focusing people's resentfulness towards issues of race, which I think will eventually lead to some sort of race war whereby whitey is going to be targeted. Things are just going bad, and something has to change. But I don't think that the people who could potentially make the change are being put in positions of power or being allowed to take positions of power to make that change. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I'm glad you articulated it this way, because you actually brought up, I think, the fundamental core issue. By that I mean, even in the way you say where you're red pilled versus where you're black pilled, you basically phrase like, I can work with individuals, it's society or it's groups that I'm having trouble with. That's the fundamental core of the issue here, which is to say that we need to figure out a solution to that issue, because ultimately it's going to come down to, will you find a way to create a society around a cohesive enough group of people that they'll function as a group effectively? Now, the big argument on our side seems to be one of two things. Either it's an ethos issue, namely the civic nationalists, like if we all think the same way, we'll be together,
right,
versus the ethno-nationalists, which is if we are the same type of people, we'll get on better. And my natural thinking is it's a bit of both. To a certain extent, but that's the puzzle we are fundamentally going to be forced to figure out. Because if you figure that out and you can convince enough people to have it, you can figure out a way to deal with the out group. Fundamentally, everything I say comes back to Schmidt. It's going to be, friend and enemy distinction. How do you define the friend? How do you define that group of people? And then how do you deal with the existential threats around you? That's also
I think that the natural ally of the hard right is the little Asian people. Yeah, the little yellow people from South Asia and East Asia. Yeah, because they're getting the shaft of multiculturalism. It's like they're not getting into Harvard. There are limitations on the number of Asians going to Harvard, and it's pissing them off. They're not being allowed to go into the elite schools in New York, and it's pissing them off just because they happen to be yellow, right? And I think it's the yellow people who offer the best hope of there being some sort of hybrid between the ethno-nationalists and the civic nationalists, because the yellow people are different from the white people, right? But in a lot of issues, I mean racially, but in a lot of issues, they're so alike that it's absurd, right? So there could be some potential for a coalition with the Asians, and that would be really interesting, because the Democrats are really pushing the Asians out. The whole idea of identity politics is pushing the Asians out and starting to identify the Asians with the white guy. Okay, because ultimately it is cultural Marxism. The left characterizes cultural Marxism as a conspiracy theory. Well, no, I don't see it as a conspiracy theory. It's a useful heuristic for understanding the political dynamic that's going on at this time. That's what it is. And, the cultural Marxists are starting to identify the Asians with the white guy, because the preoccupations and concerns of the Asians are the same as the preoccupations and concerns of the white guy. And the fear of marginalization based on race, that is the fear of white people, is becoming the same with Asians. And so that presents all kinds of interesting opportunities to thread the needle, as you basically describe it, because that's what you're talking about. Somehow thread this needle and being able to come up with a group of people who can win an election and turn the thing around, right? I mean, that's what you're aiming at. Is that correct?
Well, here's what's interesting about that. So economically and statistically, you are right. Asians, specifically Indians and East Asians, at parity or slightly above white Americans on average. A couple of reasons for that, but needless to say, they're comparable. And I laugh at this a little bit because oftentimes when I see Asians in the West, outside of Indians tend to have a lot more right-wingers. Asians tend to play the left-wing thing. In fact, I remember from my graduation ceremony, some left-wing little Asian chick was trying to talk about her underprivileged status as an Asian girl. Nobody knew my story. I'm like, you're a fucking white, next to a white suburban girl as you could possibly get. Shut the fuck up. No one cares.
Yeah.
Kind of attitude. But they play that game. And I think, that's why, and most Chinese in particular I've seen in the United States play the left-wing identity politics game. Almost
it could be young people, because I don't know any older people. I've never met anybody older who plays that game.
Typically, my generation and younger play that fucking game. It's a very sad thing, but things could change. Ultimately, I don't know how that's going to get resolved at the end of the day. All I know is that it's something that needs to be resolved in order to figure out what the fuck you're doing. Because if we're going to play the whole individualistic, liberalistic game of Sargon, we're fucked. That ain't going nowhere. We are eventually going to get screwed. And we just need to figure out how to simultaneously allow some degree of individual responsibility, as opposed to liberty, I would say. Is an important difference. While simultaneously saying, yeah, there's also a group effort and group responsibility that we need to figure out. Maybe that's the best way to end on this, because I frankly don't have a fucking answer to that. And that's also probably where you are more black-pilled than me, even though I have my black pill moments. And that at the very least, I see at least the fact that I can articulate the problem is hopeful, as opposed to just articulating the distress. You know what I mean?
Yes. And so on that cheery note of being able to figure out the malady but not the cure, we're going to leave this podcast. Maybe on the next podcast we will come up with a cure. What do you think? Let's make that our aim.
Give me a pot of coffee and a night's sleep. I'll come up with your answer.
So on that cheery note, bid you a fond farewell. This has been the Coach and Benway podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll catch you next time.
Take it easy.